We navigate the world feeling like the authors of our own lives. We make choices, big and small, every day. What to eat for breakfast, which route to take to work, who to spend our time with, what career to pursue. These feel like conscious decisions, driven by our desires, beliefs, and intentions. This deeply ingrained sense of agency, this feeling that we are in control of our thoughts and actions, is what we call free will. It is a cornerstone of our legal systems, our moral judgments, and our personal identities. We hold ourselves and others accountable because we believe we could have chosen differently. But what if this fundamental assumption is wrong? What if our feeling of freedom is merely a convincing illusion? A story our brains tell us to make sense of a reality far more determined than we perceive. This video will delve into the profound and unsettling question: are we truly in control, or is free will just a comfortable myth? The challenge to free will comes from multiple directions, weaving together threads from physics, neuroscience, and philosophy. At its most fundamental, the argument stems from the deterministic nature of the universe, as described by classical physics. If every event is the inevitable consequence of prior causes, governed by unbreakable natural laws, then our choices, like everything else, must also be predetermined by the state of the universe, moments before we make them. Imagine the universe as an enormous chain reaction, stretching back to the Big Bang. Each link in the chain is causally connected to the one before it. Where in this unbroken sequence is there room for a genuine, uncaused will to spontaneously emerge and alter the course of events? Consider a simple analogy: a row of dominoes. When the first domino falls, it inevitably knocks over the second, which knocks over the third, and so on. Each domino's fall is entirely determined by the fall of the domino before it. If we were to zoom in on the moment you make a free decision, say, choosing to drink coffee instead of tea, a hard determinist would argue that this decision was as inevitable as the fall of the last domino in a long chain. Your genes, your upbringing, the advertising you saw yesterday, the current chemical state of your brain, all these factors conspired to make you reach for that coffee cup. The feeling that you could have chosen tea is just that. A feeling, a fleeting phantom of an alternate possibility that never truly existed. This debate is not new. The ancient Greeks wrestled with it constantly. The Stoic philosophers, for example, believed in a universe governed by a divine and rational principle they called the Logos, or fate. For them, every event was part of a grand, rational plan. They taught that true freedom was not the ability to change fate, which was impossible, but the wisdom to accept it gracefully. A person who fights against the determined nature of things will be dragged along anyway, full of frustration and suffering. In contrast, the person who understands and accepts their role in the cosmic play achieves a state of inner tranquility. This was a form of compatibilism, an attempt to reconcile determinism with a meaningful sense of human freedom. Centuries later, this philosophical debate would explode into a theological war during the Protestant Reformation. On one side stood figures like John Calvin, who championed the doctrine of predestination. Calvin argued that God, being omniscient, knows everything that has ever happened or will ever happen. If God knows in advance that you will choose coffee, were you ever truly free to choose tea? For Calvinists, God's sovereignty was absolute, and this extended to the salvation of souls. God, from the beginning of time, had chosen the elect who would be saved, and the reprobate who would be damned. Human free will, in this view, was an illusion when faced with the overwhelming power of divine foreknowledge and decree. Opposing this was the theologian Jacobus Arminius and his followers, the Arminians. They argued that such a strict predestination made God the author of sin and turned humans into mere puppets. They championed the idea that God's foreknowledge did not equal causation. They believed God granted humans a form of prevenient grace, a divine gift that restores our ability to freely choose or reject salvation. For them, human freedom was essential for a just and loving God. This debate between Calvinism and Arminianism was not a minor academic dispute. It was a foundational conflict about the very nature of God, humanity, and control, a conflict that continues in theological circles to this day. While classical physics and theology laid the groundwork, modern neuroscience is providing increasingly compelling experimental evidence against free will. The groundbreaking experiments by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s seem to show that the brain initiates an action before the person becomes consciously aware of their decision to act. He found a spike in brain activity called the readiness potential, several hundred milliseconds before his subjects reported their conscious intention. This suggested our brains decide to act first, and our conscious feeling of making a choice is a story we tell ourselves after the fact. Since Libet, the technology has become far more advanced. More recent studies using fMRI scans have taken this challenge even further. In some experiments, neuroscientists have been able to predict a person's choice, such as which button they will press, with significant accuracy up to 10 seconds. Before, the person themselves is aware of having made a decision. It's as if scientists watching the scan of your brain know what you will decide long before your conscious mind does. This growing body of evidence suggests that what we experience as a moment of conscious choice is merely the final, observable outcome of a long chain of unconscious neural processes that began much earlier. But just as the case for determinism seems to be closing, a powerful counter-argument emerges from the strangest corner of science: quantum mechanics. At the subatomic level, the universe does not appear to be deterministic at all. It seems to operate on principles of probability and pure randomness. The exact position of an electron is not predetermined. It exists in a cloud of probabilities. The decay of a radioactive atom is a genuinely random event. If the fundamental building blocks of the universe are not determined, how can the universe as a whole be? This quantum randomness has been seized upon by some philosophers and scientists as a potential loophole, a source of indeterminacy in the brain that could, in theory, be the foundation of free will. The hope is that our brains might be able to harness these quantum effects, amplifying them to influence our neural firings and allow for choices that are not predetermined by the past. However, most physicists and philosophers remain deeply skeptical of this idea. The primary objection is that random is not the same thing as free. A choice caused by a random quantum fluctuation in your brain is no more your choice than one determined by a long causal chain. It doesn't give you agency, it just introduces a neurological lottery. Instead of your actions being determined by your past, they are now determined by a subatomic roll of the dice. This doesn't rescue the idea of a conscious, rational self in control. It simply replaces a predictable machine with an unpredictable one. So, if we set aside the quantum argument and accept that our world is, for all practical purposes, determined, what would that mean for our societies? The implications for our legal and justice systems are staggering. Our current model is largely based on retribution. We punish criminals because we believe they made a wrong choice and therefore deserve to suffer for it. But if a criminal's actions were the inevitable result of their genes, brain structure, and life experiences, then the concept of them deserving punishment becomes philosophically shaky. It feels like blaming a computer for running its programming. A justice system without free will would likely shift its focus entirely from retribution to consequentialism. We would no longer punish for the sake of punishment. Instead, the goals would be practical: rehabilitation, deterrence, and incapacitation to protect society. A murderer would still be removed from the public, but the justification would be the same as quarantining someone with a deadly, contagious virus. You do it to protect the community, not to blame the person for their unlucky biology. This approach might lead to a more humane and effective system, one focused on understanding causes and preventing future harm, rather than simply inflicting pain for past events. The implications extend into our personal lives as well. Would pride in our achievements be meaningless if they were always going to happen? Would love for another person be cheapened if it was just a predetermined chemical reaction? This is where we must distinguish between the objective, third-person view of science and the subjective, first-person experience of being human. Even if our love for our family is, at its root, a determined neurochemical process, the experience of that love is still real and profound. The pride you feel after working hard to achieve a goal is a genuine, valuable experience, even if the striving and the achievement were both part of a causal chain. Denying free will doesn't erase our feelings, it simply reframes their ultimate origin. This leads us to the final, most pragmatic view, known as compatibilism. Compatibilists argue that the fierce debate between free will and determinism is based on a misunderstanding of the term free will. They agree that our actions are determined by prior causes. However, they redefine freedom. For a compatibilist, free will is not the metaphysical ability to have chosen otherwise. Instead, it is the practical ability to act according to your own desires and intentions, without external coercion. If you choose to drink coffee because you want coffee, and no one is forcing a gun to your head, that is a free act. The fact that your desire for coffee was determined by prior events is irrelevant to this definition of freedom. This approach saves our most important intuitions. It allows us to distinguish between a kleptomaniac who is compelled to steal and a thief who steals as part of a rational plan. It allows us to hold people responsible for actions that stem from their character and intentions. While hard determinists might call this a watered-down, semantic trick, compatibilism offers a way to live with the scientific reality of determinism without abandoning our entire moral and social framework. It suggests that even if we are not the ultimate authors of our desires, the capacity to reflect on them, to act on them, and to be the person we want to be is a form of freedom worth having. Ultimately, the traditional notion of a ghost in the machine, a conscious self separate from the brain, pulling the levers of action, may indeed be an illusion. The universe appears to operate on a system of cause and effect, and we are part of that system. But the recognition of this does not have to lead to nihilism or despair. It can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves, a greater empathy for others, and a more intelligent approach to building a better society. It encourages us to look at the causes behind crime, poverty, and success, rather than simply blaming or praising the individual. While the absolute freedom to defy causality may not be real, the freedom to understand our own nature, to act with intention, and to consciously shape the future links in the great causal chain remains the most profound project of our existence.